folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Thought I would talk today about food storage, shelf life of food. I know it's not one of the exciting things to talk about because of all the doomsday stuff that's going on, but there's a lot of people that I think are still trying to figure this out and what they need to do to prepare. And even for those of you that's been doing it a while, don't just necessarily, stop watching. You may learn something. We may come up with some idea that you haven't thought of and help as many as we can get prepared. If you're more experienced than others, then certainly leave your comments down below of your ideas. The thing is there's a lot of people now that are getting serious about this. Yeah, they probably should have been doing this 6 months, a year ago, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. But the fact is that they're waking up now and they're ready to jump on board the ark before the rains start pouring down. So I thought I would kind of go over some stuff. None of this is necessarily in order, just some ideas that I was thinking of. So I wanted to mention that since we're talking about food and we're talking about food storage, and I'll mention this kind of stuff later. Down below in the description, you can find some of the best long-term emergency freeze-dried food out on the market. Not only is it some of the best, it's also some of the only thing that's available anymore. A lot of these companies are starting to run out, and my Patriot Supply, they're still able to keep up on their orders. They're working pretty hard, and they did a good job of planning and preparing for this. They opened up, I believe it was 3 new facilities over the past year. So if you're interested in anything from my Patriot Supply, there's a link down below in the description. It kind of helps the channel out and helps me, be able to kind of put more focus on some of these videos. All right, but hey, if you don't do it, that's fine. We're still friends. Number one, I was thinking about this, and I've mentioned these before, but I don't know that I've put the emphasis on them. I really think it's an important piece of equipment when it comes to food preparations. Not the only one, but it is an important one, is a dehydrator. You can dehydrate food in your oven. If you set it on the lowest setting, usually you can dehydrate food in the oven, but it's not as convenient, and it's going to use more electricity. Usually your oven's going to use more electricity than a dehydrator. So I would recommend, if you're able to afford a good dehydrator. I'm not talking about one of them cheapies that you might see at Walmart. They're usually round plastic things. I think I've seen them for like $50 or less. If you're really using them a lot, you're going to be lucky to get a year out of something like that. I would spend a little bit more money, and it's not terrible. I think the one we bought was on sale a few years back for $150, $160, and it's not the deluxe one, but it's a good one. And something like that, you can go through a lot of food, and the benefit with the dehydrator is that it reduces, not only does it help extend the lifespan, the shelf life of the food, it also reduces the bulk of the food. So say, for instance, and I mentioned this the other day, I think in my Patreon channel, let's say you go to a store and they've got a bunch of number 10 cans, because this actually happened to us. This is my hypothetical story that's actually true. And you go in and they have a big old pallet of those big restaurant-sized number 10 cans, and they're $1 or $2 a piece, which is, a really good price for the amount of food you're getting. But the downside is that takes up a lot of space. There's also obviously the water in them. There's the metal. They're heavy. They take up a lot of space. What you could do is take some of them, or even all of them if you wished to, and open them up, drain the water off, and put them in a dehydrator and dehydrate those vegetables. And they're going to actually have a longer shelf life than if they were just in the can. And you're going to radically reduce the amount of space that it takes to keep them. You can also dehydrate things and grind it into a powder. You can use powders and soups and stuff. That way you're getting your nutritional value of the food, but you're not having to store a lot. So We use it a lot for onions. Of course, we grow a lot of things in our garden that we dehydrate. But also, if we come across a sale, or maybe at a local farm, a large farm that produces a lot of stuff, and maybe they've got, say, onions at a really good price, we may buy a whole bunch of them and then just run them through that dehydrator, dehydrate those onions, and then put them in like mason jars. So I think a dehydrator is really a good idea to have. As far as like shelf life, always remember, number one, that the date that's on an item is not the expiration date. Almost never is it the expiration date. It's usually the best sell-by date. And there's a lot of different reasons why they put that on there and the different codes, and you can certainly look into that kind of stuff because there's different codes that they put on that'll tell you when it was made and that kind of stuff. If things are stored properly, they're going to last usually much longer than whatever date is stamped on that food. So take, for instance, canned food. Let's start with that, because canned food is really one of the main foods that preppers prep, right? Is your canned food. It's easy. It stores easily. You open it and it's ready to go. The longest usually that you can get, the longest storing food, shelf life of foods in cans, is usually your meats. And the reason for that is they tend to put a lot of salt, a lot of sodium in the meats, which preserve them longer. So your potted meats, your stew meats, any type of canned stew that's got meat in it, that's going to last the longest. That's why, one of the jokes is spam, the stuff will last for an eternity. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but it will last a very long time. And while high sodium meats aren't necessarily healthy, you can also get your protein there because in a SHTF where you're eating a lot of your prepared food, your prepper foods, you're looking at, beans and rices and vegetables, a lot of starchy foods, vegetables that, when you're can them and the older they are, they're going to lose some of their nutritional value. You really need your protein. And so as much as it does increase your sodium content, I would recommend some canned meats. Another good canned meat is tuna and salmon. They don't last near as long as your canned potted meats, like your spam and stuff, because they don't have nearly the sodium content, but you can usually get about 5 years out of them, and you can get about 5 years out of most of your vegetables. Most of your vegetables are going to last 5 years. Your soups tend to last 3, 4, maybe 5 years, and then out of the canned foods that last the least is probably going to be your fruits. Your fruits are only going to last probably a year or two. Now, that's just kind of a general rule of thumb. I'm sure many of you are going to say, hey, I've eaten canned peaches that were 5, 6, 7 years old and they were fine. I'm not saying that they wouldn't be. I'm just giving you a general rule of thumb. Not most, but all of the stuff when it comes to food, no matter how it's packaged, even freeze-dried food, the main thing that's going to determine how long it lasts is the way you store it. I have heard stories of people that's gone out and purchased, a year's supply for their family of freeze-dried food, and then they stick it in a garage or a barn that has no climate control whatsoever, and a couple of years later they go and check on it and they open a can and it's all spoiled, even though it says that it'll last 30, 40 years. The reason why it didn't last 30, 40 years is because you stuck it in some kind of building that's going to get, extremely hot in the summertime and extremely cold in the wintertime. You can't do that. Make sure that you're storing your food in somewhat of a climate-controlled environment. It doesn't have to be as climate-controlled as your living room, but it needs to not get an extreme temperature in the summertime and an extreme temperature in the wintertime. I would say, and from my research and from my experience, if you can keep the environment where you're storing your food between the temperatures of 50 and say no more than 80 degrees, 75, 80 degrees, it should be pretty good, and it's going to stay shelf stable for the length of time that it's intended to. Ideally, probably is somewhere in the 60 degree range, which in the wintertime may not be as difficult. In the summertime, it could be. It all depends on where you live and the place that you put it in. If you don't have enough room in your house and you really need to put it in, say, a shop or barn, and it's not climate controlled, I would recommend spending the extra money of at least enclosing maybe a corner of that. Let's say you have a pole barn and it's not necessarily insulated well, or it doesn't have heat or cooling in it. You could potentially just wall up a corner of that. It wouldn't take too much. Wall it up, insulate just that one room, and then just try to heat and cool just that one room. That way it saves the expense of trying to do that for the whole barn. Right now things are tight for a lot of people. So, to sit here and say, well, take your whole barn and insulate it and put air conditioning and heat in it, that's a big expense. But if you can do that at least for one room, same way with even in a basement of your home, to try to just build one room. If you just have a big unfinished basement, it might be better to try to wall off one little room to put everything in. It can also help maintain a decent moisture level. You don't want it to get too dry on a lot of things, and you certainly don't want it to get too wet. So remember, how you store your food, where you store your food, is very critical on getting it to last a long time. And then how you store it is the same way. Your dry stuff, these are all good things that you should be stocking up on. And they're obvious. You've heard them 1,000 times before. Your beans, your rice, wheat, dried corn, oats, dried pastas. These things can have a very long shelf life if you store them properly. A lot of things like rice, beans, and certain grains can possibly have bugs in them. That's just how they come, and they're not necessarily bugs that are live, but a lot of times there's little eggs from some bug in it. And in most homes, if you buy a couple of pounds of rice and you eat it within a few weeks or maybe a month's time, you're fine. But if it's sitting there for years, those bugs could hatch out and you could have bugs in your food. So there's a couple of ways to avoid that. One way is to put them in the freezer. So put your rice in the freezer or whatever it is for a while to kill out anything. Another way is to hot can it. Some people actually dry can it into jars. So they would take a mason jar, fill it with say rice, and then they would dry can it, heat it up in an oven so that the heat causes a seal on the can, on the jar. And then another way, which is how I tend to do it because it ends up just being a little bit easier, is I store our dry goods like that in 5-gallon buckets inside a Mylar bag, and you can buy them for 5-gallon buckets. And then I put an oxygen absorber in it, and then I vacuum it down a little bit. Maybe not as vacuum down as it could be, but I do vacuum it down and I seal it. And so that oxygen absorber is going to absorb the rest of the oxygen in it, and in an oxygen deprived environment, nothing's really going to live anyways. So that's how I tend to do it. It makes the process a little faster, but some people like to do it the other way. Storing it, again, is very critical. For instance, dry pastas. If you look a lot of times on the box of dry pastas, the expiration date may be less than a year, and you might look on websites, cooking websites, and they say that pasta might only last a year or two. Yeah, if you keep it in the original box or package that it came in. But if you store it properly in the methods that I just mentioned, you can get 15, 20 years out of dry pasta. And sometimes you can still find dry pasta quite cheap. So that's something else that you need to stock up on. Another thing that a lot of people miss out on is seasonings. Stock up on your seasonings, make sure you have them, and then also look for what type of natural plants, natural wild herbs and stuff that might grow in your area that tend to be used as seasonings. That they do exist in just about every region. You can find wild plants that can be used as culinary seasonings, because it's going to get real boring after a while if all you're eating is beans and rice. So certainly stock up on enough stuff like that. We tend to buy large things of stuff like chili powder, garlic powder, onion powder, things like that. Also salt. Salt is very critical. I talk about that often. A good healthy salt, not something that's iodized. And the reason why you want salt is not just for your own personal intake, but salt is also a preservative. And with vegetables or meat, you can preserve just about anything and make it last a very long time with just simply salt if you know what you're doing. In fact, you can cold smoke meat and you put salt on it, and you can make that meat last, 5-10 years unrefrigerated. So salt is very important, and you can find salt pretty cheap. We buy our salt, laugh if you want, but we buy our salt at feed stores, at farm stores. And we tend to find the one that we go to, they make a very good quality Redmond's salt that is intended for livestock, but other than the fact that the the salt granules are a little larger and they have to be ground down for table salt size, we have not found anything any different in it. And so we're very satisfied with what we get. It's a pink type of salt. Trying to stock up on food, I understand, is becoming more and more difficult for a couple of reasons. Number one, most of the people out there right now probably aren't making as much as they did. And even if you're making about the same amount of money that you did a year or two ago, the prices of stuff have gone up. And some of the prices of stuff have gone up substantially. There's stuff that's the prices have increased, 30, 40, even 50% increases over the past few months. So your money isn't going as far. And then there's the other fact that, especially in some areas of the country, things just aren't as readily available. And so even if you had a couple of $1,000s, say, to go out and stock up on a bunch of canned food, you may not be able to find enough because store shelves just don't have as much on them. So it is becoming more difficult. You have to kind of think outside of the box. And you may have to make multiple trips. You may have to try different stores. Be as smart as you can. And don't just, necessarily go and buy from the store that you normally would. Look around, look at restaurant supply stores, look at discount grocery stores. Sometimes they sell like an insurance salvage type of grocery. Make sure you stay away from dented cans. A dented can is not going to last as long. So stay away from that. But certainly, if you just spend a little bit of money, as much as you possibly can, each time you go to the store, each time you go grocery shopping, you can stock up on that. And then the things like the dry goods, the beans, the rice, and the oats and stuff, those are actually quite cheap. And, even $100 can, be a lot of food to buy. Last thing I want to mention is, it's going to take a lot more food than what you're probably thinking. A year's supply of food for a family is a lot of food, folks. And I don't think most people quite realize that. So, if you have a small closet and you've got it pretty well stocked and you think that that's enough, don't bet on it. Keep stocking up as much as you can if you're planning on having enough food to last 6 months, a year. And also remember that when you're prepping food, you're only prepping food as kind of a Band-Aid. The real idea of having food stored away is to transition you to something else. And what I always say is it's to transition you to producing your own food. So along with your preps, make sure you have seeds stored up. You need to have seeds. You need to have the ability to grow your own food if at all possible, because you can't stock up on enough food to last forever. That's just to last long enough so that you can get your gardens planted in the spring and start getting food harvested in the summer and the fall. Because a year's worth of food is a lot. And if you go with more than that, you're talking about a lot of food. And I do advocate for 2 years food supply. But I'm telling you, it's a lot of food. So stay at it. Don't get discouraged. Yes, prices have gone up. Yes, there's less food out there available in some of these places and some stores. But I think there's still enough time to get yourselves pretty prepared, considering what's going on and what we're about to face. All right, folks. Thank you all for watching. Catch you in the next video.